started. So this is the 14th of March, doing the subgroup for the specialization. So the idea is to come together and to kick off what our subgroup is supposed to do, right? I don't know. So there's a few things. So I basically built a document. Let me share my screen of all the things that we should, or that I thought we should cover, at least in this meeting. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to do is, so there's first of all a set of logistical things that we need to highlight or discuss. Is one is when do we meet, and and at what time, and how often, probably. Because we don't. I think so the goal is that we have, I don't know the exact timing, John, when we have to get release one out of the door, but probably we should target latest probably by end of May, right? Which means that we don't have, we almost have like 1.5 months left to get this going.
So yeah, we were just talking with Sana, and Stephen and I were just on a call with Sana and Kaushik, and we sort of said, yeah, let's target. Let's just, right? We can't really play with resources that much, but we can play with scope and time. So what we want to do is fix time to end of May, and just see what scope we can deliver in that time frame. So I think that yes, end of May is what we want to target.
Yeah. Okay. If you looked at our scope right now that is set for us, there is so basically I hope that is clear for everyone. If not, so our subgroup focus on so there is a fan out happening. We get a package with certain content that is there per cluster, and then we have to what we call hydrate, or we have to basically do a number of things to get it ready to be shipped to the workload cluster, right? And that is true for UPF, SMF, and AMF. And so there's a set of things that needs to happen. The items that we know so far, that we know that have to be done, or at least there is the ones that we know at the moment, is NF injector, although there is still some, we probably need to discuss, I think, with you. So there is two things in my view, John, that we need to clarify still. Is one is what we get from the package variant. So what do we get as the input, and whether the deployment is already let's say expanded or not, right? And whether we should do that or not. And then the second thing we need is there is some cluster information that we need to do our work. For example, I was suggesting to add in the cluster object, for example, whether it's SRRV or MAC-VLAN, so the type of interface that cluster supports. So we somehow need that information in order to do the NAD, right? So these are the two things in my view that are still to be clarified. But the different controllers or functions, and we will also determine that based on the work, will be NF injector, or what is left of it. IPAM injector, so meaning getting IPs for all the interfaces that the network functions need. VLAN injector, so we need to actually get the VLANs assigned, and then we allocate NADs, and then there is a fifth component, which is I call the watcher for the time being, is we need to get feedback from the workload cluster back to the management cluster to get information on how those network functions are operating. So that's basically the fifth function. So or the fifth controller, or this will be probably more of a controller type than a function, I believe. So these are basically the 5 items that we would work on in this subgroup. So I don't know whether anyone has questions, or it's still high level, so we'll go into a bit more detail. What I would like to do in this meeting is discuss, the people. So there is a set of people that have or have proposed to contribute. What I wanted to understand from those people is whether it's code, whether it's testing, or whether it's docs. So basically, if you look to our subgroup, basically we have mainly 3 activities. I'm believing one is we develop the codes for for these 5 elements. I write tests for it, or we do docs, or we do it all, right? That's another option probably, or a subset of it. So what I would like to understand is which people would be able to do what for that.
Maybe we can make a section in the agenda doc, bullet for each of those, and then people can put their name under it, assuming they have edit access to the doc.
I think, let me see what I did. No, I can. No, everybody can update it. So I just put read, but now everybody can update it. Yeah. So people who have, or maybe some new people who are willing to contribute, if they can maybe add their names and then the scope of what they want to do to the doc, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll have to do it manually. Or do we want to go through the list?
Maybe, yeah. We can. I mean, we can talk through it. But I don't know.
I'll share the link in. Yeah, I'll put it on the. I put it on the Slack channel. So yeah, if people can fill it in, that would be for me the easiest way to get that. With respect to timing, so the other thing that I was going to discuss is that anyone who feels that that is feeling ready to become like the sub-project lead as well. We don't probably have to decide it right now, but if someone is willing to get there, or basically feels that he or she wants to be or can get into that role, that would be also appreciated. All right, so thanks for filling it out. That's so basically maybe what we can discuss a little bit is in terms of timing. I had the feeling, or personally I was of the opinion, that we would meet in the beginning rather regularly or more often than, because I think in the beginning it is important for all of us to understand what needs to happen, and then hopefully we can divide and conquer a little bit. So I don't know how you guys see this. Is that I flush it out, or we go and we split up? Is how many people are actually familiar with what has to happen, and so on and so forth? I don't know. I was of the impression that we probably first have to do a bit of explanation and deep dive of what we have to do. We can even use some of the codes that we already have today and start from there, or any other suggestions?
I think it's a good idea to go through the major points of the injectors that we have, of the code of the injectors that we have. I've read some of the code, but it is always good to hear of how the already existing code is working, especially,
Okay,
for example, regarding these readiness conditions and how to handle them in both in kept packages and the readiness gates in CI.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. Some of the code is actually not in our nephew, I think. But let me go through some.
If you go to the oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. Before we look at code, do people like, are people clear on the concepts of like how the conditions management works in packages? Do we like, I don't know, do we want to dive right into code, or do we need more level setting, I guess is my question.
Yeah, we can also do that inside of the, when we explain the code, we can also explain it at that level potentially. Now this is still the code of the POC, right? So basically that's what happened in the proof of concept. And there is actually, this is basically the code. I'm not saying it's very well structured at the moment because this happened a bit quickly, if you will, but yeah, so this code has to probably be refactored. We have to write testing and stuff like that. But yeah, so first of all,
Rim, before you start, sorry, I missed the first 5 minutes. I'm sure it was mentioned, but so do I understand correctly that the fan out, the package variant set like thing belongs to John's SIG package automation subgroup? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Go on.
So yeah, what I was saying is we come in when the package is it has been created, and when there will so in the POC what happened at the moment, the package controller was creating that package revision into ports, right? So basically there is a package revision that got created, and in that revision there was, I think if I'm correct, John, there was a condition already set to be untrue, and that's what basically triggered, or actually what triggered this this code basically, right?
Yes, there was a condition. So conditions are just Booleans associated with a resource, a status of a resource. And this is a common pattern in Kubernetes. And we're doing this on the package. So the package will have a resource, or the package revision will have a condition that, and in this case, the little trick we used is when we fanned out the package, we attempted to inject something, but we couldn't find a matching name, which is how we did the injection there. And so we set the injection to false. So the package sort of declared, I need this thing injected. Mm-hmm. And then since we weren't able to inject it during fan out, it's set to false. And so then there's an injector watching and saying, are there any package revisions with this condition false?
Yes.
And that's what triggered it.
Yeah. So yeah, so also the reconciliation loop, if you will, I mean, if you look to the code, here you see the way it's triggered is that we have a for loop on the package revision itself. So what actually happens, and so the package, so basically ports is basically scheduling us on a regular basis. So it's not really a true event, but it's actually a watch that actually at the moment I think happens every minute, but maybe it has changed in the meantime. But so we get triggered based on that package revision. So you basically create a for statement which is based on that package revision, and that's how that reconciliation loop gets triggered. So Porch is doing that for us. Okay. So the first thing that we do in the code is we unpack. So we basically get the package revision. So we basically get that information. And what we do as a first step is to see for this controller, are there any unsatisfied conditions that are there, right? So basically what this, if you look to this code, what it does, it goes and look for UPF conditions. So it was a specific condition that was set by the fan-out controller. So we are looking at the conditions, and we were looking if that was set. And what we did is we appended that, because we basically said, okay, if there is some, then we can see whether some of this is true or not, right? And what we then did is the length. So we checked if there is some conditions that were not satisfied yet. We do some work. If not, we are done. Okay. So then, yeah, go ahead.
Question, sorry. So that means that all of the conditions has to be there in a false state at the beginning, initially.
Yes. So what
all of the conditions that we want to have an injector for.
Wait, so not necessarily, because you will see later in this code. So in the current code, or the current way it was going, you see that this injector is creating new conditions for the IP allocation. So you will see that in a bit. So this one was satisfying the first condition, right? Is basically he will act on the UPF, and then he will create additional new conditions that were going to be consumed by the IPAM injector. So, and he was setting them to false.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So and it does it before setting its own condition to true. So there is no transient state when we only have true conditions. Okay. I'm asking because, so if I understand correctly, at least in pods, there is a thing called the readiness gate that is very similar to this. And if I am correct, that how it works is that in the specification, there is a list of strings, basically, that are the names of the conditions that has to be present in the status with a true status, ready status. And if there is no status for that string that is specified in the spec part of the pod, that is considered a false condition, basically. That is my understanding how it is working. But we do not have this list of readiness gates in the spec. That is my question.
So there is actually, but we're not using it right now. So that we did add that because this is modeled after exactly that, pod readiness conditions and gates. So we actually have a way in Porch to give a list of readiness gates. If all of those conditions get set to true, there's a controller. I don't know that we actually released any of this because it's got issues, but there's a controller that can say automatically propose. So the idea would be the package author, just like in a pod or like controllers can add to it, but also the package author could say, here's my list of conditions that need to be satisfied for this to be deployed. And so once all those are satisfied, there can be an automated controller that goes in and proposes it. One of the issues you run into is that one of the things we found was like, if you wanted to edit it, but it wasn't like one of those things that's required, then you're just going to keep getting proposed. And so we had an annotation that said whether a given deployment wanted to opt for that automation. So it was a little hokey. We experimented with it at one point. I don't know that Morton ever released it because of that hokiness, but it's something we should talk about as an FEO team. Is this something we want from Porch, and how should it work? And we can inform Porch for that. Right.
Okay, but I understood how it works now. I understand.
So basically, the first thing we do in this piece of code is there work or is there no work, basically, right? If there is work, we call the inject. So here we inject the NF info, so which is basically this piece of code, right? So what we do here is basically, because we are going to change the package revision, we are copying it. So we're doing a deep copy of the package revision itself. And then we go and I need to check the code again. So we do, so here we basically inject the resources into the package, right? So basically, the thing that we get is, so there is this, so package revision and package resources, package revision resources, sorry. Package revision resources are each individual, the individual YAML files, if you will, that are there to basically give, we can walk over, run over, so we get the individual YAML representation of each of the resources individually, and you will see that we will process those to actually figure out whether we have to do something with it or not. So that's basically the logic of the code, is looking at some of these files. So some of them they just ignore, and some of them they act upon, right? So the first thing that we do is we get the resources, and then this is a piece of code that is a library that we unpack those, let's say, resources into a package buffer, right? And then what we do, there is a set of helper functions that we have that we can use in order to figure out things about it. So we have access to the regular KRM information, like namespace name, but also labels, annotations, and stuff like that. You can get direct access to those type of things in order to act upon them rather quickly. If you have really to go into the spec, you actually have to parse it. And there is I explored multiple flavors, and you see in some of the controllers, I did different strategies. Some are more type safe than others, but we will walk through that into the code. I don't think in this code this is that relevant yet. So, but the first thing that we do in the controller is what at the moment we also did, and this is something I think we should try to avoid, is we actually, the current controller, this guy is actually trying to get access of the 5G core topology. So what we call in the CRD proposal, we call the NF topology. In the POC, this was the 5G core topology. So basically, we were going to reach out to the regular Kubernetes API server to get access to that resource. So that's what's happening at this point in time. And we got the name of that through the resources that were in the package, right? What we also, wait a minute, find the corresponding UPS spec. Yeah, so what we were then, so we basically tried to get the cluster name from there. So that's something that we got. And then we looked at the UPF specification to see, okay, how many UPFs were there? Because at the moment, I think there was only one, but you could actually have multiple. So there is, so this is the UPF information. We were also, again, in this controller, we were looking up the class on the Kubernetes API server, right? So we were basically on the API server, actually were querying the UPF class as well, because that was giving us information on how many interfaces of various resources that we needed to have. So here we were doing that. And then we were, so what you see sometimes in these controllers, so that's one of the things that we have to be careful on, is that what you can have is that while you are allocating, for example, so what you'll see here is we are already starting to inject the allocations. So what could happen, for example, if the let's say you were scheduled through ports to basically do work, and then the next thing hasn't really happened, it's possible that these IP allocations are already there. So what we did initially into the code is we were looking to see, are there already allocations available? And if they are there, we potentially don't want to reallocate them, right? So what we were doing here was checking okay, were there already allocations available? And if so, yeah, what has to happen? We were also doing some validation here to actually see, is there more than one endpoint allocated? So for example, at the moment, we were only expecting 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 6 and stuff like that. So this logic will have to change a little bit because our CRDs are a bit different. But these are type of things that we were trying to do in order. So this part is actually a little bit of validation. And this part is actually trying to identify how many endpoints that we needed to have in order to allocate information for. Okay. Then what you see here is we were actually walking. So this part is actually getting information. Yeah, John, you raised your hand.
So I'm just wondering about how we, like, obviously during the workshop timeframe, we just did what we had to do to make it work. But this is very specific, right?
Yes.
And I'm wondering how we should be thinking about how we generalize. I know with our new CRD model, maybe it's automatic. Maybe it falls out of the fact that we have certain resources and we just process them. But I'm curious if you have thought about that. How ideally our code is reusable across many different network functions. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so at the moment, so what is called network attachment, and probably we have to change that name because it's confusing, right? So I'll first answer this. What you will see is that we have, what I wanted to do is build a controller that acts upon these resources, and that can be reusable. I want to build a library of these things such that we can reuse them, because what we should avoid is building a specific piece of code for UPF and another one for SMF and another one for AMF.
Yeah.
All these interfaces are interfaces, so we should build a library that we can reuse. And I think with the new CRD schema, we have that set up to do so. Yeah, indeed, it's a very good point. Yeah, and of course there will be some specific for potentially SMF and AMF, but what we should try to achieve is build them in a way that we have libraries, so that if it's for us, we shouldn't care on the interfaces whether it's AMF, UPF, or something. We should just allocate stuff, and this is a common set of code that we can reuse, and then we do that for all the different pieces. So I would like to do that for definitely for IPs and for VLANs. That should be table stakes. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess this is still a little unclear for me. We've talked about operator versus controller, and this is a controller that you're proposing, right? To do with IPAM and VLAN.
See, an operator is a collection of controllers, if you will. I think for us here, we have two options. We have either, I would say it's a controller, but it's packaged in an operator because it's one-to-one, if you will. So the operator and controller is one-to-one in what you see here. So that is, it's one operator with a single controller inside. We have a choice to do either a function. So maybe I'll go through a function after this one, just to see the difference. You can see the difference in terms of operation. So these are the two things that we have. An operator and a controller, it's just an operator for me is a packaging tool. So you could build multiple controllers in a single operator. For example, if I show you the IPAM, actually there is multiple controllers in the IPAM there that act upon it, and they are packaged in a single operator.
Oh, that's not what I meant. Sorry.
Okay.
If I wasn't clear. Right now is specific. The code we're looking at on the screen, we're specifically focusing on UPF. And from an SMF perspective, I was following this pattern, right? But with your comments, your presentation just now talking about controller and generalize it to operate on certain resources. Not clear how that would apply to SMF.
Okay,
Difference between control.
So we are still at the package specialization part, okay? So what we get is we get packages, right? So we get a package for SMF, we get a package for UPF, and we get a package for AMF, right?
Yes.
That is commonalities in these packages. So what are those commonalities? Interfaces, or
Yes.
what we call network attachment at the moment. So what we would like to do in our project here as part of release 1 is make that code generic in such a way that we can use it as a library. So in other words, let's say we use a controller like we do here, and it's an SMF or a UPF because the package contains a similar, the CRs, they are the same CRs for interfaces, if you will. Of course, in the case of SMF, they call N4 and they call something, they call N blah. And in case of UPF, they call N3 and N6 and stuff like that. But the allocation of the interface doesn't really care what we are allocating it for. That code should be the same. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so yeah, so there's a method called get NAT, and we get the interfaces, and then we call the IPAM controller. Is that what you're thinking?
No, so you will see that in a bit here, right? So at the moment, you already start seeing it a bit, I think, but these things will potentially change. But actually, you'll see it already here. So, for example, what we are doing here at the moment, we are looping through all the packages, so all the content of the package, and we are trying to see, give me, so all the IP allocations are collected into a regular object here, right? If you look to this code, whether this would be an SMF or a UPF or an AMF, this code would act the same. Same for cluster context. So this is generic. This is still specific, right? So as such, what we want to do is make a set of libraries. So if we would build the same thing for the SMF, that this piece of the code is the same, and this piece of code is the same for both. And then we have only specific code for potentially UPF, SMF, and AMF, if there would be specifics there. That's what we are talking about.
Okay, so sorry. When you say a library, what are we talking about? Not the highlighted segment, but the one above and the one below it will be a library call out?
So for example, if you look today, what we have as a library, if you look this up here, right? Here, ports, resource to package buffer.
Got it.
This is a library that I think John, you did, or the CAP team did. And this is being used in all the controllers to get access to all the KRM objects in a package revision. So all the resources in a package revision, you basically, if you call this function, you get that through that library that was built by John and the CAP team. Okay,
I got it.
And we would do the similar things for IP allocation and interfaces and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, because I was wondering if this was a new library we're introducing, but I forgot it. It's Porsche. So that
wait. But these libraries here, so actually this is the wrong side, but what you see here you see IP allocation, this part here, this should become a library.
Yeah, that makes sense now. Sorry, not enough coffee this morning.
No, it's okay. So like one of the things that's weird that we're doing, right? So if you think about an ordinary Kubernetes controller, what an ordinary Kubernetes controller does is you put a resource in an API server. The controller watches for that resource, acts upon it, and reconciles it, maybe makes calls to some other system or whatever, and then writes back a status. So we're doing something a little bit weird here in that we're not operating on resources that are stored as ordinary resources in the Kubernetes API server. They're just basically resources sitting in some Git repository. We're happening to access them through Porch, which is an aggregated API server. So we're using some of the same machinery, but we're not, it's like we're seeing a package revision. That's the resource we're seeing from the Kubernetes API server. Embedded within that is a whole list of all these different resources that aren't even necessarily ready to be added to an API server. They're like under construction. And so then we're trying to operate on them. So it's a little bit weird what we're doing. So we're having to build some extra layers to deal with those oddities.
It begs the question, and I'm not trying to open the debate. I'm just trying to get clarification in my head. This makes us very tied to Porch, right? Because we're dependent on Porch library.
Yes and no. I mean, we can ultimately, we're like that, the highlighted code that Wim showed below, that was like, it's just Kubernetes resources, and none of that does anything with Porch. We're using Porch to retrieve it, and then we're operating on it, and then we're using Porch to store it. I mean, we are dependent on the concept of accessing these Kubernetes resources as data in this way, but it's not so much directly on Porch. It's on some way to retrieve. We're using Porch as like basically it puts a Kubernetes style access layer on top of Git, is what it does, right? So we're relying on that, absolutely, but our actual logic doesn't necessarily rely on that. That's just the set and get.
So what happened if we switch to, say, Argo or something like that?
So Argo would have
not
to
compatible. But I think Argo is not compatible to Porch. I don't think there's any equivalent today in Porch to Porch, because Argo is more compatible to config sync than to Porch.
But okay, forget the word Argo. What happened if a vendor comes in and say, we don't want to use Porch?
See, okay, so here is the thing, right? If you look to the function controller that I did as a prototype, right? What this does actually, and that's why these libraries are important, right? Because these libraries will be a function in that context. So I think that's how we have to think. And that's why I also like these kept package functions, because they do one thing and one thing very well, right? So these libraries should do the same thing. So that means that, let's say later on you have a function approach or whatever, you basically take these functions, that code should be reusable and plugged into other systems. So that's why for me, that is probably the piece that we have to be mindful of, is to build that part in such a way that we can decouple it. So that's why I'm of the opinion that these libraries that we talked about, and I fully agree with John, is that if we can make them very generic, we can reuse them in various flavors and forms without too much repurposing.
Yeah, in fact, so we sometimes say kept function, but they're actually called KRM functions, and they're actually a standard part of Kubernetes SIG CLI. In that specification, if you go back to the glossary and you look through, you'll see a link to this somewhere under KRM functions, I think. There's a specification there, and they define what they call function orchestrators and functions. So kept is an example of a function orchestrator. Customize is another example of a function orchestrator. Porch is another example of a function orchestrator. Kept and customize use CLI. Porch puts a Kubernetes style server on top of it, but ultimately they're all running these functions. Now, a lot of the condition stuff is something we're presenting through the Porch APIs, because that's a Kubernetes style API. So that might be challenging to do in other ways, but it's not. There are some API dependencies we're building, but it's not necessarily an implementation dependency. So.
Okay. Thank you. I don't want to hold up anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, where was I? You see, at the moment, the code is not very structured. So it's basically one flat thing. So it's you see that this was.
Wim wrote this on the plane, right?
Correct. So this came, overnight, if you will. So yeah. So then, so what we are doing next is collecting. So this is the part that I was saying. We are collecting the resources that were already there, because what you sometimes can see is that during some of these loops in this distributed nature, you could get re-triggered somehow, and then your allocations were not there. So we cannot end up with too many allocations. So we have to be mindful of that. And then, yeah, so basically, once we are through here, what we were doing is we were basically starting to allocate for every endpoint that we had, we started to allocate IPs. Okay. And so what you see is that we are using information. I like the network instance, network name and stuff. Our network name will be obsolete, so that's gone. So we started to allocate these IPs from it. And so there were two different endpoints. One was the physical endpoints, and then the 4 and 6 we had to allocate a pool. So with the new CRD structure, that also becomes a little bit more simpler to do, because it would be that would already be indicated into it. So we don't have to. So we can just do an if statement. So it becomes a bit easier. And then what we also did is we basically expanded the UPF deployment. So the UPF deployment got expanded based on all the endpoint information and stuff like that. So we were expanding that resource out. And then once that was done, so what has happened is basically we augmented. So if the resources were not yet in the package, we were allocating the additional resources into the package, and we were setting the conditions. So here you see for UPF deployment, we were setting the conditions to false or true, depending on the status of it. And that was then a way to basically indicate that we were done somehow, right? And then we came back. So that was all the code that we started. And then if that injection was okay, we were done, basically. So the controller is rather simple. I think the key point here is, as we were discussing, is the reusability and making it very generic. I even hope that between UPF, SMF, and AMF, we can also find a pattern on which we can make it generic as much as possible and have very specific codes for the differences, but make it as generic as we can. Yeah, Isti?
Yeah, so two things. Maybe it is not the time for it. Maybe it is the time when we actually start to design and write and modify this initial seed code. Well, two things. One of them is that, so in this implementation, the injector reaches out to the topology resource.
Yes.
It would be nice to avoid that, isn't it? So it would be.
Yes, yeah. I agree. Okay. So that's kind of I think we have a common sense around that. That should not happen. So in other words, I think what we are aiming for, as far as I understand, is that none of these controllers should call out to anything, right?
Yes. So that is where I wanted to get that. After the fan out, when we start to modify and update the package, we should already have all the information we need in the package itself. Maybe I mean that maybe not in a hydrated way, but at least the input for the injectors should be the information. For example, that is the other part, but that is what I think is also asked about, that right now we had a statically encoded into code that there is an M3 interface and an M4 interface. And instead of that, we will have these network attachment resources in the package, isn't it? And then we will just go through those and that will solve our problems. Okay.
So yeah, so we won't have, yeah, you said like we have all the inputs. We'll have some of them, but like we won't necessarily have all of them. The idea is that different control. So the idea of using controllers here, not just functions, is that we don't have all the inputs. If we had everything, we didn't need to talk to anything else, then we would just use a function. The only reason to use a controller or an injector controller is because we need to talk to something else. So like the IPAM allocation, it needs to talk to the IPAM system to allocate it. Now,
yes,
the results of that talking to something should be within scope that could trigger the need for additional controllers to execute. This is this collaborative thing. So we did that in this. Now I agree with you that we knew the topology up front, the topology in those inputs up front at before fan out. So we should have been able to include them. And so it shouldn't have been necessary here, but it just happened because of the timing of the workshop. So I think with the newer CRD structure, that becomes a little bit easier. And one of the things I'm kind of experimenting right now, and I'll talk more about it on Thursday for people who are interested in the package management side of things, is trying out some of the primitives and seeing, you know, what the gaps are and how we might do that. So in the fan out process, we have a certain amount of variance per fan out package that we can inject, but we do need these controllers to follow on with things like IPAM allocation. So, but yeah, in general, I agree. What we did by going and looking up another resource that we could have already had ahead of time was not a good way to do it.
Yeah, so, sorry, can I jump to that? So just to reply to this, yes, totally agree. I think the typical thing that where we want to reach out is the target environment, or at least, so the new thing here, because here that where we talk about is that we are after the fan out. So before that, we added all the target environment independent things, like how many logical interfaces this particular network function will have. But now we also know that what kind of network attachment definition should be created, because now we know the target Kubernetes cluster. So that is the typical thing where we want to reach out, is that how the target environment will look like, and then we will configure the package based on that. Yeah, but I agreed with all of it. Is just an addition for what you said.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, totally agree. And like an example of the IPAM, I think Wim has doing this now. Like, it takes the IPAM request combines the information about the target environment, what site it's going to, with information that was known ahead of time, which network we need the IP address on. But the segment, right, of that network, because that network's a sort of generic name, which actual subnet you're allocating from depends on the site. And so like that's two pieces of, it's targeting information and static information coming together, and then we can make the IPAM request, which is kind of what we're trying to showcase, is that combination.
Yeah. Okay, so now, given time, we are almost at the hour. By the way, I can either go through another, maybe I should go through a function, or we discuss the timing of our next meeting. Or we do that in Slack or something like that. Because I think if you look at what I would like to meet, I even have no problem meeting every day till we are kind of settled to get going. But of course, tomorrow we have the regular automation meeting. So yeah.
I still Thursday for my meeting. Sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if we had an 8 a.m. meeting today. I assume we didn't. Also, Tal has suggested that the workload subgroup meets at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. So I'm now,
No, this slot was just ad hoc. This slot was ad hoc. So this is not a generic slot yet. I just said, okay, I need to get going, so let me get started. So that was the reason. But of course, I just shot it out of the blue, basically.
No, that's fine. I'm just worried that we will have multiple subgroups sharing the same time slot, and
so we will try to avoid that.
We can't, because we only have one Zoom Pro account. It doesn't let you do that.
Yeah, I can't split time.
But Zoom licensing will prevent us from doing that. Sorry.
But John, you have one planned on Thursday or what?
I took 9 a.m. Thursday, and I said, let's do that every week unless somebody objects. So like you said, I mean, meeting very frequently, more than, I don't know how much I can demand of people, right? Like when we did the workshop, we did the workshop, I set up a daily scrum, and a lot of people showed up for it, but that was for like a 2-week period, right? So like maybe, anyway, it's up to you how you want to do it. Right now, I'm set up. I'm going to talk to the package management team on Thursday, and I've blocked out that time, but I don't know if people are going to object to that time or not. So we'll see.
I see. My point is this, right? There's a lot to go through. From the moment we have somehow a base, we can probably slow down. I want to do it in the beginning rather quickly. But yeah, so Bala, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, sorry for joining this late because I had had a overlap. I could not skip the other meeting, so sorry about that. Yeah, I think, and another thing I wanted to tell is just this week, myself and Vish's schedule, it's a spring break here in Texas. I know it runs in different times in different parts of US. So our availability may be a little bit up and down. I know Vish is out. So I just wanted to say that next week onwards, we should be fine. I'm fine with any proposal, Wim, that you're making, like until the knowledge transfer happens, like the way you're doing. Thanks for doing that, by the way. If you want to do it like every other day, daily from next week, that's fine too.
Yeah. Does anyone has an objection if we do it tomorrow at 8 before the SIG automation, or I can also do after, but maybe for people in India, it's not appropriate. I think Ganesh, you're in India, I think, right?
Yes, I'm connecting from India. It's almost 11 p.m. now.
Yeah,
Great.
I was there last week, so I felt your pain.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
For my selfish reasons, I was thinking from next week, but it's okay, Wim, if you want to do it from tomorrow.
No, see, if we have Thursday already 2 meetings, probably it's too much for people to join. So tomorrow we have 1. So is it okay that we schedule tomorrow at 8? I just wanted to potentially do the pace a little bit higher in the beginning in order to get enough knowledge shared so that we can then get the thing divided up for and then take it from there. Okay, so
I can't make it at 8 tomorrow.
I'll record the session anyhow, by the way. So I'll record them. So that's the thing. But is the majority able to join or?
8 a.m. is generally good for me, but tomorrow is a national holiday in Hungary. So
okay.
that one particular day is it's not good for me.
Yeah, maybe we should
I'm technically on PTO. I'm technically on PTO, Wim, but if it is something is needed, I can join. Anyway, I was planning to join the automation meeting tomorrow.
I see needed. I wanted to reach the May time frame, which means I'm of the opinion if you meet every week, it's going to be tough. Potentially, yeah. Because
no, I agree with you. I think it's multiple days is fine. Multiple days is fine.
Okay. I'll schedule it for tomorrow at 8 and we'll see how much we get and then we'll take it from there. I'm going, Sagar. Sagar, you can go ahead if you want. I don't know what you're muted. Yeah, you're now. Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I was saying, Wim. So, do you know when the Google Seed code gonna come? Because right now, since you're gonna give a knowledge transfer on this code, which we use for the POC, for the Linux one POC, but now it's gonna be on Google Seed code. So, when that gonna happen?
I don't think this part overlaps with the Google Seed code.
Okay, so it's gonna be untouched, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless Steven, I don't know whether he's there, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, Steven, we cannot hear you.
No, we cannot hear you.
I think you're correct there. I haven't looked at the seed code, but I think the question was whether this piece overlaps, Stephen.
Yeah, sort of.
Should be early next week. Seed code.
I don't think we have any injection going on in the seed code.
Yeah, that's also what I understood. So tomorrow, what I will do is I'll go to an injector. It's way simpler. Sorry, to a function. So we'll go through a function. You will see the difference.
Yes,
And
sorry, Wim,
yeah.
just to give context what Stephen is saying. Yes, the watcher would be part of this group.
Yes.
It's part of the seed code, but the rest of the stuff, I don't think is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't want. Yeah, that's indeed. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to let's deep dive in the watcher yet. But we take the watcher once it's there, and we can start looking at that next week, maybe once it's available. But then we finish the other pieces before. Okay. Yeah.
Do you mind pasting the link to this code in the Slack just for reference?
Yes, I will do. Yeah.
Thanks.
And I will also do the functions. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I think that would basically call it a meeting, I think, for now. And then, yeah, there is, yeah, I documented. I'll have a look in the documents. I think there's many people who have filled that out, so thank you for that. And then let's try to meet tomorrow. I know it's a bit okay. Bala, you still have a question?
Yeah, the functions, right? I mean, it was a very fundamental question I wanted to ask. Maybe when we say function in the context of post, right? I mean, so how does it run in the context of a controller, or I just wanted to understand some basics on that one. Maybe not the question for this forum, but I couldn't stop resisting.
If you don't mind, Wim, I'll jump in. So
yeah, go ahead.
I would say it depends. Like Wim has a function controller that would run them within the context of a function. I think it's useful to put them in the context of a function. Functions that are part of the kept file, the pipeline built into the kept package, Porch will run those automatically every time you save it. So those are the idempotent functions that should be run. So there's a separate set of pods for function runners that it doles out these functions to be executed and whatever, but like does it all behind the scenes. So, but we want to leverage functions, and I think Wim probably will talk extensively about that, potentially leverage functions directly in controllers, but I think the context of what he'll go through next time is probably in the function pipeline, which Porch is running automatically.
Yeah, so the function controller is not relevant in the discussion. I'm just making it as an example, but yeah, so they run in the context of kept as part of the pipeline definition in the kept file. And yeah, they are executed as a pod. So the way Porch schedules them, there's a function runner, and each function is executed within its own pod.
Okay, cool. Thanks both of you. Yeah.
But we'll go through that tomorrow in more depth. And okay, yeah, we are over time. So thanks all for joining for this ad hoc meeting. I hope it was useful. And then let's talk tomorrow. And yeah, we'll take it from there. We probably need to figure out a slot that we schedule on a regular basis. Probably easier for people to organize themselves. So, but maybe we'll try to figure that out in the Slack. Or maybe I'll do a poll. All right.
Isn't 8 a.m. tomorrow?
Yeah, 8 a.m. tomorrow is still ad hoc.
Oh, ad hoc. Okay, thanks.
It's ad hoc, but I'll maybe do a poll. Yeah, I don't know what is the best way to do it, but maybe do a poll for the team to actually get through a timing, or do it through Slack, probably. Yeah.
May I suggest that you, John, and Cal coordinate so we don't overlap? Yes.
But we are a bit divide and conquer, but we have to do both of them, I think.
Yeah.
Because we have to also ask the team members, because not everything is overlapping. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all for joining, and let's try to meet tomorrow for everybody who can join. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.